what influenced your decision to become a member of this community?
Influenced my decision. Well, I think probably a number of things. After working at on other farms and just thinking about alternative ways of living and the possibilities for that, and this place seemed like it was in line with a lot of those values and concepts that I was thinking about. And I met Josh at while we were both apprenticing with a theater company, Brendan Puppet Theater, and it was at a particular time in my life when I was searching for what's next, somewhere to be for at least the next 1, 2, 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think from there, after coming for a visit and kind of having a sense of what the mission was, just seemed in line with where I was headed and just my thought processes. So, yeah.
Great. I forgot to say, this is Regina Rinaldo from DAcres. And now, how long? And you've been here how long?
I've been here a bit over 5.5 years.
Right, and then you're leaving.
And yes, I'll be leaving sometime at the end of this year. Planning to stay through the growing season.
Hmm.
So probably at the end of November.
Yes, I was looking at the solarium. It looks great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's
that's
lots
really
in there.
cool. That answers my second question, how long you've been a member. Now, do you have any other family members living here with you as well?
No. Just me.
Although your parents come to visit.
They do. My family feels very welcome here. Visit.
I bet your parents both seem pretty cool. And what do you think is different about life in this community as comparison to a mainstream community?
You mean just like living out, like in a...
Yeah, just having a 9-to-5 job, and community work, and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I feel like I can only imagine because I really haven't lived in a situation like that before. So I don't really have a lot of personal comparison. Most all of my living situations have been where I live, where I work. So with maybe a couple of exceptions, like when I was between college years and living with my parents. So I guess I can only draw from, what other people tell me or how I have seen other people living. But I guess I can say, when you live where you're working and it is in a close, small community, the challenges of stepping away from your work are greater. Where it really is living into the concept that, yes, your work is your life, and it's not just like I'm working a job and then, I go home, but my life is my work. So that can be challenging and really great at the same time.
I think that's pretty cool that your adult life, that you've really just always lived somewhere where you've worked somewhere.
Yeah. And I think that's one reason why I am just going to step away from this, is to maybe try to experience other working situations and living situations. It might be just beneficial for understanding why I have been continuing to choose situations like this, and whether that is best suited for me.
So what brought about that sort of process, do you think, in you?
Well, one of the main things was thinking about and starting a planning process for potentially building a house for myself here on this property, and going through those steps of making those plans, and working with the board of directors and the property owners to understand feasibly and realistically what that looks like, and how that, and the time frame for what that looks like, and what my input would have to be for that. It got to a certain point where I was just sort of questioning whether this was the place to do that for me, and at this time. I mean, yeah, one of those factors too was I'm a single person in my 30s, and feel already, as this amount of time has passed 5 years, and wondering, I have just a lot of questions for myself personally. What does family look like? And into the future, if I invest in building a home here, in a somewhat, we're not isolated, but it is a somewhat isolated kind of a place.
Yeah, most people know where Dorchester is.
Yeah, well, and let alone just like being working with this organization and living here, everything happens here. It's on occasion we go out and do things, but it takes a lot more effort to go out from here, where we make so much happen just here through the organization and on this property. So I just don't have a real clear understanding of, if I built a home here, how much of that would really realistically change for me. And so wondering if there was some separation, maybe I could gain a better understanding of what is that other personal life that I haven't really cultivated. So.
Yeah, and that's important too. And also, if you did build a house here, as you need to tell you, that's like also a huge level of commitment as well. So, yeah, so it's very interesting. Now, right, did I ask you this? What do you think is different about this community in comparison to mainstream community? Is that what we were just talking about? Yeah, okay.
Kind of on that, yeah.
And do you feel that you live a fulfilling life within the community? And if so, why? And then how would you define a fulfilling life? It's a big question.
Yeah. I do feel like I am leading a fulfilling life. And I think that a fulfilling life is being able to do things that you enjoy doing. And yeah, but this is an interesting question, because at the same time, going back to what I was saying before, there are some things like beyond just the doing and the making and the creating that are not completely fulfilled.
You're talking more about I'm going to be really prying here, more about your personal life?
Yeah.
So
that I
have
don't...
A significant boyfriend, a significant other?
No. And I don't have family here. And I think that, when I think about people who are settled kind of in this area even, that I know, they at least have family, like their parents or uncle, or, there's somebody else around. And so I think, that's something that has come to light for me over the past year, is just, well, yeah, deciding to, if I were to, deciding to settle here does feel like a very solo thing. And even though there are many people that I care about and are here that I know care about me, but I think there's another level to family, and yeah, which is a difficult concept to bring to this place, because a lot of the nature of why the DAcres, the place being DAcres, has been developed so that people who are not blood relatives and are not family can come together and live together. But I have come to realize for myself personally that there is something grounding about having family, whether it's family that you create or family that already exists. So I'd like to discover that for myself, or find some kind of peace with what it is, like understand
so
what
you want
it
to
is.
venture out and see if you can have that experience of possibly having your own family. And,
Yeah, or even just coming to understand, how I could kind of create that for myself.
So you think that it worked out with the right relationship, that you want to have children?
Potentially, maybe. I don't. Yeah.
It just depends.
Yeah.
Now, you're also, so are you examining, looking at going to other communities, or just sort of thinking about venturing out into like the mainstream and see what happens?
I have had all of those thoughts.
Yeah.
So I still feel pretty uncertain. I've been exploring a few different avenues, but not too in-depthly. And I haven't really felt like a really strong connection to go in any direction just yet. So,
That's one way. It'll be interesting to see what kind of process you go through as you do that, because it's like a huge thing for you. It's a big change. And it's not
a big change.
Yeah, it's not like just changing a job. It's like changing your life, your whole life. So it takes a lot of courage to do that. Well, it sounds like your facial expression says, I have my self-doubt about that, but the fact that you've gotten this far with it and, sort of gone public, that's huge, and that does take a lot of courage. So you do, whether you realize it or not. Now, how do you feel you coordinate your personal needs and goals in life with the goals and purpose of the larger community?
I should have looked at these questions a little more in depthly right before this. This is a really interesting question. Because it does sort of go along with what I was saying a little bit before, or I can expand upon it in that in some ways, I feel very fulfilled by the work and the doing and that creating, and I feel like that really does fulfill a personal goal. I suppose you can make separations between professional and personal goals. And so that keeps in line with, what the mission is. And I think that there is some amount of my own personal self, like I was saying before, that I have to some extent put aside in order for the just the larger mission and the larger picture and the larger vision of what is going on here to manifest itself. And I think that in a lot of ways is the nature of living with a group and living in community. you are putting aside, whether you use the word sacrifice or just, putting back the self in order for the greater whole to become one. I suppose I could argue myself out of that by saying, well, if everyone puts their whole selves in, then everyone is being together. But I do think it is finding a balance between, well, yeah.
What do you see as your goals within the community, as you've been here? Because like when I talked to you last year, it was like a little bit earlier than this in the year, and that was that funny little moment where I asked you how long you'd been here, and if you remember that, and Josh was sitting at the table, and you said, I've been here, 4 years, 7 months, and how many days?
Oh.
And then, I laughed, and I said, you're like a state worker, they all know exactly how many days they have to retirement, and then Josh was like, whoa. So there was a process going on in your head even then, from that statement, but what you said to me was that you hadn't reached this point of evolution in your own thinking about what you want to do with your own life, but you had said that you saw yourself staying for a while because you had other things that you wanted to accomplish. So, so I guess more of sort of, how would you define those goals that you sort of set for yourself as you've been here?
How do I determine what is my goal and my role?
Yeah.
Just in life or in the community here in the work here?
Both. All of it.
Oh, well, I guess I could say I've received a lot of support, not only family but friends, and just as far as just pursuing things that I enjoy, and just trying things because I'm interested in them. And actually, I was sharing this with someone the other day, where I think I've come to the realization that, in some ways, I think I really appreciate and enjoy and find a lot of satisfaction in the process itself. I think that the outcome can be really amazing, and I can marvel at wow, look how many potatoes we got from this plant. But I think figuring out and seeing the process through and being a part of that is, I find a sense of satisfaction in. But yeah, I guess how I define.
Well, you have there's the more sort of larger philosophical goals, of the organization, and then there's the more sort of in the moment concrete ones. Like for example, at the board of directors meeting, you were excited because very shortly after that, it was going to be the first kids program that you did, and that was basically your idea, right? Or was it?
So many things, it's interesting. Actually, this is interesting because this was something I was thinking about the other day, where when Josh and I are in conversation about different things, and maybe we're bouncing ideas about things, I don't think we ever talk about whose idea it was to make this thing happen. It does really just sort of meld into this, this grand word of the we. Rarely, unless there is really something that I feel like I have done, I made that dandelion wine, I definitely did that, that was, but I'm obviously sharing it with everyone. We often use the word we for, get back to us, or let us know, or we will talk about it later, or we the great
Yeah, it's
a
like
group of us.
right, the collective we.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as like projects and things like that, if, you know, as far as like planting what we want to plant, so I'm interested in growing corn, and so we are now growing corn. You know, yeah, I don't
So
know.
it's hard to separate out where those ideas sort of ebbed and flowed because there's that sense of collective, you know, thought and unity. Is that right?
I feel like I have that sense. I mean, yeah, like I said, certainly there are things that have been done here because like, maybe I would like to do them. I guess, well, let me think about the kids program. I mean, that came about in a lot of ways just naturally because it seemed like, you know, there were more families that were interested in being here, and so we wanted to explore that a little bit more. And so, yeah, I don't know, maybe Josh was just like, let's have a kids' day, and then from there it was just like thinking about how to make that happen and
It is nice
come up
because,
with the ideas.
you know, I get the sense that, you know, that it's a very family-friendly environment, you know, so that's, and I think when people come in with the little kids, and especially with your neighbors, with that hilarious little kid that they have, what's his name? Liam. He's such a sweetheart. And, you know, with that being sort of like more of a regular mainstay, you know, and then when people see that, then they feel more encouraged to, you know, like, oh, maybe I should bring my kids next time I come back. You know?
Yeah,
And,
I hope so.
yeah, and I always felt welcome bringing my kids, even though my kids are big kids. You know, but I was telling Josh that it's interesting because the process of me doing this work, plus them being, you know, you know, like coming here because this is the place where it's concrete for them, is, well, you know, Scarlett already sort of had this in her head of, you know, because she was really interested in the whole, you know, farm-to-table movement, and she would love to get a job in it, but, you know, she unfortunately has such massive student loan debt, you know, she has to make more money than she could without. But David is majoring in environmental design, and he's really, you know, he wants to, you know, have further training and, you know, be certified in permaculture. And then Genevieve, she's talking about how she doesn't want to go to college right away after high school unless she can find a program that she can get a degree in permaculture or something very closely related. So it's really interesting. And they talk about it. They talk about their experience. You know, even though they don't maybe talk that much when they're here, when they're away, they talk about it a lot. They talk about it to their friends, you know. So, you know, they think that everything's, you know, the whole place is pretty cool. And, you know, and that, you know, they are, you know, mightily impressed with the work that, you know, you and Josh have done here and how much work it's taken to do this, you know. And so, you know, you think of other kids coming in that are maybe sort of formulating their concept of how they look at the world, you know, that being exposed to this kind of environment and this kind of lifestyle is a very, you know, positive thing for them. So, so that's something, and encouraging that is, you know, is cool, even though you may not think about it like that, you know.
Yeah. There's a lot that I don't realize is going on just because I'm doing.
Yeah,
you know,
you're doing it. And Josh and I were talking about it. Josh, like, I don't know if he shared this with you as we've sort of gone through, but like particularly like last year, and I was sort of going through much, you know, I had to go through this whole like academic process, you know, was as part of like my own sort of, you know, like massive education, you know, which, you know, you guys have lived your whole life, and when I came, I mean, there's bits and pieces of it that I, you know, it's not like it just started from nowhere. But it was like, okay, to do this on an academic level, it's like you have to all of a sudden read all this stuff and, you know, think about things like this. And so I was talking to him about the, you know, the dynamics of being, you know, like a leader, you know, and how that, you know, plays out. And that was right after, I can't remember his name, Richard Baker, when he left.
Oh, Scott.
Yeah, when Scott left, and Josh was still feeling really sort of you know, raw about that. And so there was a lot of talk about the sort of burden of that, and why people have these expectations of, you know, of somebody that they view as an authority figure and that kind of stuff. So anyway, Josh turned to me some of this, and he goes, it's really interesting. He says, so you're thinking about it like this. I just, and, you know, I says, you know, I'm in it, so I don't have time to, like, you know, have the perspective to, like, think about it like that. So that's exactly, you know, because you're living the life. And even when I was up in La Cité, this weekend was my first weekend where they had me come and do a presentation, which I'd be happy to do with you guys at some point too. And, you know, talking about, you know, my dissertation and blah, blah, blah. Because they were a little afraid because I have these, you know, these very sort of academic research questions. And then somehow there was a confusion about that those are what I was going to ask them for the, you know, the interview questions as opposed to, and I was like, no, those are like, you know, those are the larger questions on CDM. And I said, no, I mean, most people look at me like, what the heck are you talking about? And I said, no. They're like, oh, phew, we're afraid we're going to, because, you know, they speak French primarily as their first language, so they said, well, we thought we were going to have more intensive translating. But they were a little, you know, concerned about, you know, even the word permaculture, which I think I talked about that downstairs. But anyway, what was interesting is when we were talking about, you know, like what they do and how this fits in, you know, with my research and everything, they said the same thing. It's like, you know, we're just so busy, like, looking at this. They said, this is, like, really fascinating because we hadn't really thought, you know, that we're doing this stuff. And so, you know, that those different layers of stuff that go on, you know, when you're in it, you know, because it's your life. You know, and that's a whole different thing. So it's understandable.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, in thinking about leaving here, I think that that's been something I've had to just emotionally kind of deal with, and I think still, in a lot of ways, dealing with, which I think has also sort of been a block in trying to make a decision about what direction to go in, is that I really do deeply, like, want this kind of thing to work, this kind of experiment, the community living, and I'd like to know that it can work for me, and I can feel happy and good and about being a part of it, and so to think like that I would go and do something completely different is sort of, you know, I think I'd said at one point, you know, in conversations with Josh, just in explaining this, like a sense of sort of disillusionment, like wondering, like, is this really possible? Like, and the sense of disappointment for myself, and having to figure out ways to work through that, and it could just be that this is a time, just for me, a time in my life where I have to just experience something else. But and that's, yeah, it feels difficult, like, inside. It's just like,
So what do you think it's, you know, you used the word disillusionment, you know, so what do you mean by that?
I mean that some of it is about, like, really, really wanting to, like, change the world.
Yeah.
And think that it can be done by living a certain way, or just participating in the world in a certain way, and having this vision of, like, people who are maybe specialized or really using their skills to their ability to make the community function, and just seeing how, you know, it's certainly nothing that can happen fast, and I don't know if I personally haven't participated and seen an example of that actually happening. Not here. Well, not to the extent that I see in my mind, you know, not to the, because we certainly are using our skills to, like, make this work.
So you mean like giving up that,
Yeah.
that level of commitment? That's where the sort of the solution. Like, is
Yeah.
this possible?
Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
And sort of grappling with like the feeling of like, oh, I'm giving up, but not really wanting to, and not really thinking I'm giving up, because I know that there's got to be, you know, whether it's experiencing something and bringing it back, or going somewhere and seeing that actually happening, or experiencing something, in the mainstream, like completely different, and realizing what that's like. I mean, I have a vision of maybe what that looks like or feels like, but I don't really know. That actually could be really fulfilling. So, yeah.
Well, I was talking to Josh about how, as I sort of structured my dissertation thus far, is that, of course, one of the seminal works of, any environmental movement is Walden, back to Rome. And then you get to the intentional community end of that, and then you have Walden too, by B.F. Skinner, so you've probably read both of them.
I actually haven't, but I've been told to read them.
Yeah. It's
a lot of books to read.
I know, it is. It's like so much.
But I know about it.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, so like Twin Oaks and Earth Haven were bottled. They were the ones that survived, and I think they're still around the room. And I'm sure they must have had to modulate their basic framework, because that was a fictional Walden too. It wasn't a real thing that he was doing. It was based on his being an analytic behavioralist. That's where he came up with that. And of course Skinner wanted to use this book to sort of educate people about the fact that sort of like the perils of modern civilization. It was first published in 1948, then it was republished again in 1976, and then that's when it became sort of like a hearkening cry of the environmental movement, and also as well as there were a lot of communes being formed at that time too. So that's there were academically intentional communities. The term has always been around, but it's been more sort of come into the mainstream in the last say 20, 30 years than it was before. But my thing is when my sort of focus on studying communities like this is because I have to be objective as a researcher, but yet on a sort of personal level, looking at the success or the not success, because I have to look at its failures, that, it's like, the next phase is Walden 3, and that, to use a metaphorical term for it, and, then there's all these, people, like everybody from David Ulrum to, Jared Diamond, much more academic, Josh and I are talking about collapse, and they're both books that I've used in my literature review, and the idea that if we don't realistically come to terms with what we're doing, the way we use the environment, and how we integrate into that environment as human beings, and instead of seeing ourselves as something separate from it, and that psychology of needing to be like part of the environment, that that's what's going to change the tide to sort of save humanity. And that's why I think that the work like this is, it's so hard on an incremental little basis, but yet, when I've been out there studying this stuff, I realized that, what you were doing here is just part of this larger movement that seems to be gaining more and more momentum.
So, like you're saying, it's hard when we're like here, and, like I'm saying, so much happens so insular. Like it is. Like I don't know how waves are moving.
And that's what we need to find out. Yeah, that would be cool. Hey there, Ben. Willie? Oh, I know I always want to call you Ben. Hi, Willie. And what elements of permaculture design do you practice in your everyday life?
Willie. Oh, in my everyday life. Well, this is interesting. I've never taken a permaculture design course, so I feel like, not that you need to in order to understand the practices and principles and things like that. But yeah, sometimes I think like, oh, wouldn't it be interesting now, after like living this, to really understand, like, on the classroom level, like
theoretical level.
the theory of it.
It's so funny because you have been living it.
Yeah, and but yeah, I think it would be nice to understand, with a group, talking that through with an instructor, like the theory. But I don't really know. I feel like it is just the everyday, the observation of the different areas we're working in.
It's so funny because when I was talking to the director of La Cité, and her name is Marie-Josée Vaillant, and then the attorney of the organization, her name is Marie-Josée Duval, and so the director is Maya, the nickname, the other one is Neva, and so that's how they don't get confused who they're talking about all the time. Plus, I think they have those nicknames before. But when they were asking me about the term permaculture, because somehow somebody that they've been associated with has said something about that they, because like they didn't plow their roads in these contours or something like that they weren't a permaculture community, but they like total organic farming. They recycle everything. They have solar, wind, biomass. I mean, their infrastructure is extremely impressive. And I'm like, you are a permaculture community, and they just don't use the word. They talk about being an organic, farming community, and plus they have this other huge mail order business and catalog thing that so I don't know if you were there when I was talking about this. That they have it's called Kiops International, and last year their sales were $5 million.
Oh my goodness.
And they provide like 85% of the income for the community. And it started from a little teeny company that Maya did when she was a teenager, like selling incense and incense holders and these little like pyramid things, that's where the Kiops comes from. And then it just gradually grew and grew and grew, and now they distribute like like organic food that they bring in, and then they have all this items in their catalog that is everything from jewelry to when I was there, they had a big shipment of these about 4-foot Buddhas from Bali that have come in, and then they sell those and they ship everything out of there. And so they have about 10 people in the community that work there, and they have about maybe 25, 30, 50 or something like that from the larger Togo community. So they're actually an employer for the community, so they're part of that whole thing. And so they've really got their acts together about that. And but it was just interesting because when I was talking to them, I asked them this question, or we were going over the questions, because to make sure that they were going to prove everything. And then they were thinking about that, and then they were thinking like the same thing, like, well, geez, I don't know. Look what you do. Everything you do in your life, you grow organic food, you eat organic food, you do all these things to promote use of sustainable energy. You use sustainable energy sources. Your whole life is integrated with that. And it's the same thing with you. You're like, oh yeah, because it's so much a part of what you do that maybe you just don't even realize it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Because when I'm with other permaculture instructors, like Steve Whitman, who does the co-teaching with Josh for the PDC here, and Lauren Chase Rowell, who was a teacher out a little bit more beyond Concord, I've sort of talked about how I don't, I've never taken a PDC. I don't really know about. I feel like I don't really know what all these students are learning, and they all say to me like, you know more than you even realize, like, and in some ways, like, even when you read you know, you begin to read Permaculture 1, you know, Mollison's, and
Mhm.
it does talk about, like, well, like in the beginning, I think, an introduction, I think, it talks about how a lot of it really is, you know, it's not like it's, I guess I use the word intuitive, but it comes from, all these things already exist, you know, and it's just seeing that they're there, and then being a part of what's already there. Yeah.
What do you mean by that, seeing what's there?
Well, the like number one thing you have to do in permaculture is observe your what is around you, your surroundings, and so like just being aware of the natural surroundings, whether it is like the forest or the field, but then also the community and the people, and then integrating into that. So it makes a flow.
Yeah, I see a lot of that. See, you know more than you think you do.
Yeah. But all that's already there. I don't know if I'm making any sense.
It's just that it's the way the things exist, and then looking to see how to utilize that for optimum benefit, but optimum benefit for the environment as well as human
for everything.
Yeah. How do you think, you know, there's that, you know, the more Holgren's revised definition of permaculture is that that also the need to attend to the personal development and fulfillment of individuals within the environment. So that sort of fits in with, you know, we're talking about you and your personal fulfillment. And so you think about that. That's sort of like,
Yeah, that's, what is it? I don't know what all like the zones are and what they all stand for, but isn't there a zone for like or maybe some people were talking about it. I think this is like a big thing for maybe like Starhawk. I don't know. I don't really know. I'm not like you know, there's like the zone 0 or something like that, where that's like the individual, like the internal, and maybe the spiritual. I don't know. And so, yeah. I mean, living in community, we were having our group meeting on Monday. We have some new folks here who've been here, one person who's been here for less than a week, and this other couple who's been here for almost 3 weeks. Almost 3 weeks. And you know, it did kind of come up in the meeting, just, you know, people sharing in their check-in, the feeling and the idea of balance, and trying to, you know, in particular, this couple is a married couple, and they've been married, and knowing they want to stay married and be partnered, and recognizing, you know, that's certainly a new thing for DAcres. Not people in relationships, but definitely having on staff a married couple, that's different. And, you know, recognizing that, you know, this individual, or these two individuals, not only need to find space for themselves, but space with their partner, and then as well as balancing that with, the list of things to do. And that is that's an important thing to make sure that we're addressing, and it remains transparent. When there is this sort of like long list of tasks, and we all have to divide that amongst us, and maybe sometimes it feels like, I think what I was bringing up at the meeting was that I felt like there was an imbalance. Like it felt like someone was volunteering her more than I felt like was the fair share. And I felt like I needed to vocalize that, but was willing to like be okay with it, you know, even though I felt like it was uncomfortable to me, and still felt like it was unfair, even though this person was like, I don't mind doing it, I'm just gonna do it. And then other people saying, well, like, I can't do it because I already feel like if I do that, then I'm going to have to knock off something else on my list, and that's going to throw me off balance. It's a really, I don't know where I'm going with this, but yeah, the being able to find that, you know, where does the self come back into that? It was just what I was kind of saying before, you do have to like let some of that go, even though it feels unfair. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
So where are they living? So you've got a couple, and then then your other single person. What's your name?
Liz.
Liz.
They're all living in tree houses.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, hardy souls, hardy souls.
Yeah, Brett and Kristen are in the one down there,
Mm-hmm.
and Liz is across the street.
Yeah, and there's like a wood stove in them, right?
They don't.
They don't.
That one doesn't.
Oh, boy.
Well, they were, you know, it's warming up.
Yeah, I know. I give them a lot of credit. I'm just too big for one myself. I can't do it.
Yeah.
Wow. And Kristen's, where's she? Out in...
Kristen and Brett are
They're down there. And then
Liz
Liz
is across the street from the other tree house.
Oh, you realize there's one over there. Oh,
Over there.
cool. Now, what else would you like to share about your community?
What else? I don't know. I mean, my perception right now is that there's going to be some changes here. And I think some of that is based on, I think for Josh, you know, looking into the future for himself, and, you know, really trying to answer the questions for himself, what he wants to be doing for, you know, some whatever indefinite number of years. And how the board of directors fits into that as far as, well, sort of the stewards or the keepers of the vision of the organization and, you know, the financial picture, and how involved they're going to be able to be in that as well. Which, you know, I should be saying we because I am a board member also. But, yeah, I think there's going to be some big, well, hopefully not too big, but just some changes in understanding. There are just some changes in maybe not the structure, but just who's here, the personnel, maybe, and then how that fits in. Actually, Josh and I, you know, you were bringing up leadership just a minute ago, and yeah, that's leaders have to be present, and there needs to be leaders, and I think here my perception has been that, you know, Josh has been in that leadership role, and doesn't totally love it.
I know, I could tell.
And I think that some of that is maybe, like, I mean, I'm not interested in psychoanalyzing that, but, like, I think some of that is just his own uncomfortableness with, you know, what, you know, a leader, equating that with someone, you know, authoritarian or, you know, super authority, that people just don't like that. And so, which I don't totally agree with. And sometimes and I was trying to express the same actually last night, sometimes I wish he could just sort of accept the fact that he is a leader and he is good at that, and that it's not a bad thing, and it can be accepted by other people. I think people find him charismatic, and they find him, I mean, he is someone who has done a tremendous amount of work based on just the drive to do something, not only just do something different, but do something different that is good for the community around him. And yeah, that's my wish. but you know, after all these years of sort of being in that role and just the push and pull of like of what that is I can understand too. It's it can be tiring.
Because it never, in his perspective, it like never stops. You know? And it's interesting though when I think like the communities that I've been studying. So, Findhorn in the early days, they had the Keebeys that were the original couple, and then Dorothy McLean, who was their friend, and they were the original leaders. And then, I guess at some point in the 80s, Eileen Keebey told Peter Keebey to go away, like when they go to the place. And then, by then they had like a board, and they had, or I don't know how exactly it evolved, but they now they have a group of their community elders that run it, but they also have other people involved in the community that they get together and make decisions about what they're going to do. One thing that I thought was really interesting is, other than you and Josh, but that most of the people on your board are actually quite elderly. Yeah, and how did that happen?
I don't know. I think, in some ways, I think that's, when I look at the people who are doing things, especially in this town, or in the surrounding towns, it does seem like the people who are available are people who are retired, or
have the energy and
have the time. Many people who are younger have families. I mean, the youngest person on our board is Brian, other than myself. Brian, who's a very busy individual. He has a business and a family, and serves on another board. He's trying to start a school. Like, is a very busy person. So I think that's just been, and board members, most of these board members are people who have either been affiliated with the organization, they've been members in the past, contributed financially, or someone knows someone, that kind of thing.
I just thought that was sort of interesting.
It would be nicer to have a more diverse group, for sure.
How many board members do you have?
Currently, 5. Only 5?
Yeah. You'd see that there's more people. Unless it was maybe there's spouses standing around.
6.
6.
Sorry.
Okay.
6 and myself and Josh.
Yeah. It's neat. So it's a, it's like, it's this huge thing of, what of looking at how the community can evolve and then and how all these pieces have to come together to make that happen. Personally, I think one of the biggest challenges is deciding, when you're talking about building your house, that's like one of the biggest challenges for communities to, is how to bring in more people, and that's what the design would be, or the goal, and then how do you provide like year-round housing that people that are wimps like me that just couldn't handle living in a treehouse in 30-degree weather.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, that is a big, housing is a big challenge here, and figuring out what that looks like. Currently we have a committee that's working on that, and trying to come up with like a manual, basically, of like what, specifically it's the land use committee, so coming up with like, well, if there were to be a house site, where would it be located, or where, if a house site were to be built, this is where it could be built, these are the guidelines, and yeah, this is what, how it would be wrapped up, like the package.
I was telling Josh that at Finmore the other day, because I saw they were a couple of recently completed private family homes, within the eco-village. And what they do is that the property within the eco-village is property of the organization, the foundation, so that people own their individual houses and they can buy and sell them, because the community felt that way. They also have projects where they create houses, but then people will sort of like, I guess, like buy rights to a spot, but they don't really own the property that the house sits on. They can own the house, or they can maybe buy like what we would think of as a condo unit and a co-housing, because they have a unit, because they have the combinations of different things. But this one house, it'll be interesting to see if it's sold when I go back, because last year they had 8 purchase and sales agreements on it, and then when it came down to the nitty-gritty, when people had to make the commitment to be part of the community. I mean, they can have jobs. A lot of people have jobs outside, but you have to volunteer a certain amount, within the community, and you have to, be willing to. If you have a garden, it needs to be like within permaculture, guidelines, and you just can't. And you need to live a sustainable lifestyle. So it's probably people that, it's that whole shift from being independent to thinking of themselves as being, even if it's only on a part-time basis, as being part, it's still a big commitment to be part of the community. So when it comes down to it, they've said that when people haven't been able to do that, then they realize that, they can wait for the next person to come along, or the next couple or family, because that they really need to have that level of commitment within the community to keep the community working. So they can't, they don't want it to sort of, fraction off into, people like, well, I live in the eco-village, but I don't want to talk to them, I'm just going to do what I want. So you guys don't want that happening. Like, I just want to live on this, have this great view, and live in this rural community.
Yeah, I think that was part of the challenge for me. For me, there wasn't a strong understanding of like, okay, well, when this house gets built, what does that mean for me into the future? Like, and I wish I didn't think about security in a certain way, but like the way things work in life. I mean, I didn't, even if I did live here for another 10 years, I would just be in my 40s, and like, if some life change happened and I did move, I really wouldn't have any, I wouldn't have any assets, I wouldn't have anything to take with me.
Security.
I wouldn't have any security. And I think the board was really willing to work with me on that, but I felt like I still, it just wasn't quite there yet. As far as, the understanding was like, okay, this house is built, but basically DAcres still owns it. It's just this sort of long-term lease kind of a thing. But I would never, it's not like my house that I would be able to sell.
Yeah. And see, that's the difference with some of theirs, is that they can sell them. They get the money back, but they can't like subdivide it off. They can't. It has to be, whoever else buys it has to be willing to live within the same framework.
But does Finhorn build the house, or is there
some of it? It's both ways, because there was a house that was right across from us when I was talking about, and I guess somebody had entered in an agreement with the community, and he was a mason, and he built this gorgeous, a cut like block house, and sandstone, and it was round, most of it was round, and they just moved into it, and you could see that it was the first year with a garden around the house, and they had been working on the house for like years themselves, and so that was built by that individual, and then the one that they had up for sale, the community built that as a way to generate income for the community, because it was originally listed for like £300,000, and then when I left, it was of course the housing stuff, and I think it was much more realistic. It was down. I even thought it was really overpriced then. I mean, it's a lovely house, but you really didn't have a big of a yard, and like just looking at it from American standards of, a house that you would pay like $200,000-300,000 for. It's like, but Britain has a whole different kind of standards, And the other thing, one of my friends that I met when I was in Finhorn, she was the director of this Newtown organization, and Newtown is a movement that the government is doing in England, where they are building the environmentally sustainable communities that in different sites around the country, and I think they want to, by the year 2025, they want to have, I think it's like somewhere like 16 and 20, and some of them are small villages, and some of them are like small towns where there's like as many as 5,000-10,000 people. And so that's going on over there, and Finhorn's got a lot to do with that. So when you think about that kind of thing, it's really sort of like, cool. But it is that whole thing about, what do you do? And then also, because Finhorn got to the point where they realized that all they could support was really, like the totality of their housing and their medical needs and, food and whatever it takes to live, was roughly about, 150 people. And there's 300 people that live in the actual eco-village. And then they have this housing development that went in on the side of them that is part of Finhorn, like they didn't have enough, their sewer system that they have, their living machine, their biomass, the processes, that was at capacity. So they would have to buy more property off to the side of where that is to make it larger to accommodate more, stuff going through. So they decided that that wasn't an option. So they piped the new co-housing units that went into the main sewer system of the actual Finhorn town that's separate from the Finhorn Foundation. So it's, they've had to make those kind of choices as they've grown, and then the idea that these people that they, and they're all co-housing units, so they're all, like they buy them as like you would, like a condo. I think there is some of them that they actually rent. So there's different things. But the thing is, people volunteer in the community, like there's some elderly people that volunteer enough, so they get like lunch and dinner provided by the community in the universal home. But then they have, other people that, that they work outside the community because, that the community just can't support them, but they want to be affiliated. So it's very interesting how they, tried to, keep their core going, which the core group of 150, they're some of the original residents, and they're all, getting in their 60s and 70s, and some of them are in their 80s and 90s. So as, like in the next 10 to 20 years, that's going to be a whole evolution of what happens with that, because these people are dying, so, okay, they don't have a core group, so how do they replace that, that kind of organizational energy and simple manpower, to make things work. So that'll be, I think they've been thinking about this, for a long time already, but it's just going to be interesting to see how that actually happens, so it'll be interesting to watch that, because it's so much invested in that community already, so. But, it is these are big questions, and I think intentional community have to sort out. But anyway, so well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank